Hey guys, welcome back to Down and Dirty Mods. This is our third video in the sleeving tutorial, and we've got a lot of stuff to cover, so I just want to go ahead and jump right into it. The first thing I want to touch on are basically custom wiring types. What we're kind of showing is a way to do a full set of wires, but there's also the possibility of doing extensions. I'm not a big fan because a lot of these older cases, the space behind the motherboard tray is already pretty tight, and trying to throw extra wires and extra connectors back there makes it even worse. But if you want to start out with extensions, you've already got all the knowledge to do it. The last video showing you how to sleeve your wires is all you really need to know. Basically, you would take and put a male terminal on one end and a female on the other, and then you would have to get male and female connectors that go together. Put those in, make sure your wires line up with the numbering on your connectors, and you're set, you're ready to go. I did start out doing extensions. That was my first foray into it because tearing into one of these is a little bit, nerve-wracking if you don't know what you're doing. So it's a great way to start. But if you want to get right into full sets of sleeving, we do need to cover a few extra things. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at our case here. This is a fractal design Define R4. A lot of D words right there. This is one of my old cases. Man, I want to say it's 3 years old, 4 years old. It's been through a couple of different builds. And right now it's housing a relatively decent system with an unlocked i5 and a GTX 770 GPU. And I just recently put in a RM750X power supply. And I wanted to use this as our guinea pig. It's kind of the perfect system. It's not out of date hardware-wise, but it is dated. And the case isn't the newest, latest, and greatest, but it's still a nice case. So we can take something that maybe is not as flashy or isn't brand new, do a few mods to it, and make it something new. Make it flashy, make it look better. So this is our guinea pig, and we're going to start out by figuring out our wire lengths for doing a full set of cables. Now I'm sleeving with red sleeve and red wire. I could use black, but that would darken this up, so I went ahead and bought some red. And what we want to do is kind of determine where we want to run our wires, and then we need to get the length of the wire that we're going to use. So what I'm planning on doing, since I'm actually going to shroud this PSU at some point in time, that will be an upcoming video, we're just going to come out, go in this bottom grommet. Now let me turn this for you all a bit more. Go in that bottom grommet and then up the back of the motherboard tray, and then come out to our components. Basically, it's the easiest way to go. We're going to get a column of wire in the back that if we ever decide to put a back panel back here or maybe put a window on it, it'll be nice and it'll look good. So what we're going to do is start out with our wire down at the bottom, right through our grommet, and we're going to do our VGA first. We're going to bring it back in. If I can manage to get it through this grommet, in this lower grommet. Get a little extra. And we're basically just going to hold it up about where we want our cabling to run. Now, when we do our motherboard, we'll be looking for the longest run that we're going to have to do. But with VGAs, you don't get much difference moving side to side. So we're going to hold it up, make sure our cable is run about how we want it. And then we're going to take any slack out of the back, come down to the PSU, and we want to give ourselves plenty of room to work with. I like coming out and then doing like a 90-degree bend about where my connector is going to be. Because normally you don't actually have that 90, so you gain a little bit of distance. And it's always better to have extra than not enough. So we're going to hold it there, kind of pinch the wire where it hits the PSU, and then pull this wire out, keeping hold of our wire. And then with a set of cutters, we're going to cut it. Now this is our master VGA wire. Every wire that we make for that GPU is going to be this length. And that'll come in handy in a minute. But what I'm going to do is label it real quick so that I don't forget which one it is. Trusty tape. So that is VGA. And we're going to do the same thing for our motherboard and for our 8-pin. And then normally you would also figure out your Molex and your SSDs. Now, I'm actually going to move the SSDs, so I'm going to run the, if I were to actually start this up and use it tomorrow, I would run a standard, the wire that came with the power supply, because I don't want to make a custom set just to have to throw it away and make another set, or get too involved with something I know that's going to change. And as far as the Molex connectors that come, we've only got one Molex connector in this case that powers the fan controller that comes with it, and I'm not going to use that. I'm going to either go with my fans running off the motherboard or off of another fan controller, and hopefully we'll find something that hooks up with SATA. So we're not going to worry about those two styles, but we will do our motherboard and CPU, and then trying to think if there's anything I forgot. I don't think so. I'm going to get those ready, and then we're going to go over to the workbench and kind of set up a work area that will hopefully help your workflow go smoother. So see you in a second. All right, so this is my workbench, and you can see I start out with a couple of pieces of tape. You'd think I'd own stock in 3M by now. I use this stuff for everything, but for sleeving it's really handy because it's actually multi-purpose. My first strip, what I do is I'll make a starting line down here, and I'll use this to measure out all my wires. So let's take our handy dandy VGA master that we have apparently taped together now. That's a motherboard, never mind. VGA. And we'll pull our tape off of it because I use it on everything, so it's everywhere. It's everywhere that you want to be. So we'll take our master VGA line, we'll butt the end of it to our start line, and then stretch it out, make us a mark, and then give ourselves a line there to mark it VGA. Now what this does, it's a couple of things. First off, it gives me a way to measure my wire out easily and be able to reproduce the same length all the time. All I've got to do is string some cable out, line up with my start line, stretch it out, and I can take wire cutters, cut that line right there, and I'm going to be able to reproduce that every time I do it. And it's also, to me, a lot more precise than trying to string these out and make sure you cut right there and hope that, as you've done that, the ends haven't gotten off kilter a little bit, which they actually have. That's about a 1/16 off. So, that 1/16 every now and then isn't a big deal, but if you flip your master wire and you start growing your set of wires, it can actually add up to pretty big problems. So I switched over to measuring out like this, and since then I've never had trouble getting everything the same length. So what you would do is basically lay out your VGA, lay out your motherboard length, and lay out your CPU length, and you can cut all your wires. Now once you've done that, go ahead and go back to the last video over the actual sleeving, and you can sleeve those wires. Go back after this video actually, because there's one point that does need to be covered before you do that sleeving. But after you're all ready and set to go, you can go back, cut your wires, go to sleeving, sleeve all those wires, and then we get into pinouts. Pinouts are basically the way of figuring out what pin and wire on one end of your cable corresponds to the other end. So I've got our VGAs right here. We have an 8-pin on one side, and we'll ignore this extra, but then we have a 6+2 on the other side. Now these cables, it would be nice if they ran 1 to 1, 2 to 2, 3 to 3. That rarely ever happens. And actually it can't happen because our 8 pin is missing a wire. There's only 7. So somewhere along here, things change around and double up and move. And actually, let me hit a side note about connectors, in case you didn't know, because I didn't know when I first started. All connectors are numbered, and you probably can't tell, but this is a 24 pin, and there's small numbers across the top, and that's 1 through 12, 13 through 24. Every good set of connectors is numbered. So I used to try to draw out the representation of the grid and then make sure I had the clip so I knew which side was facing where. But if you go by those numbers, there's really no question. All these connectors are labeled the same, and if you get into females, they correspond. One is actually what would be opposite, basically. So if you flip that connector around, one would correspond to the one on this. So when you're doing extensions, you actually go to 1 to 1, 2 to 2. So, and then also for some, there's also 3 dashes on top, or 3 sets of dashes, 1, 2, and 3. That's also corresponding to the pin numbers. So when you do your pinouts, you can actually make a grid of numbers telling you where everything goes. And I believe, don't quote me, but Molex are usually numbered, and I believe SATA connectors are not. So anytime you get to the ATA style, you're going to be in good shape. Molex, you'll be in good shape. SATAs, you actually have to do a little bit of research to find out your voltage, what pin is what. So back to our main goal here, to figure out what pin corresponds to what pin on either end, we're going to have to cut into this set of wires. So you'll want to take an X-Acto knife and just cut the heat shrink. And since I'm not using the wires again, I'm not really worried about cutting into them or damaging the insulation on them, since it's going to be going somewhere. That's usually pretty easy to cut. Then you peel it back sometimes. Apparently I didn't cut everything well enough, or maybe Corsair just really glued the heck out of these things. There we go. Got a corner that time. But pull that off, and then you'll want to cut this heat shrink off. Now you can try to snip all the way down the wire and not catch a wire, but really the easiest way is to, since this is standard braided cabling or sleeving, push it all together and it all bunches up. So instead of cutting 2 foot of sleeve, you can get by with cutting a lot less doing it this way. If you can get the scissors in there, might be the first spot. There we go. So yeah, and that's not a huge thing, it just saves some time. What am I hitting? Push it over our heat shrink. Haven't done that one before. And we're just going to cut this up to our heat shrink on the other side. And to simplify life, I'm actually just going to cut this set off. That way you can kind of see what I'm doing, and I'm not fighting this thing the whole way. And that really doesn't matter because all this is doubled up on the pins. So I normally don't even double the pins like that. If I'm running 2 pins to a VGA or 2 sets to a VGA, I'll usually use 2 different connectors on the PSU. That also comes into play that I usually only run 1 GPU. So if you're doing multiple, sometimes you do have to double things up. So we're going to take our X-Acto knife, cut the other side of our heat shrink. And peel this side off. Ooh, it's got a capacitor, which is a good thing that we want to touch on anyway. So, oh man, Okay, so there we go. Our sleeving's off. PSU side, the 8+2. Actually, the 2s are full sets. Now, this capacitor here, you'll have to do a little bit of research. Check out online with your PSU manufacturer, or a lot of times, you know, I'm not going to say to trust Reddit or online information, but you can do enough research online that you will find out whether or not you can get rid of that capacitor. Basically, its job is to take ripple out of your PSU. Now, ripple is the difference in voltage between like the max and min that a certain rail will produce. So you may have a 12 volt rail in your PSU, but it doesn't necessarily always make 12 volts. It might make 12.05, or it might make 11.95. That variance is your ripple, and that capacitor smooths it out. But from what I gather from reading up on these Corsairs, that actually takes it to like a super low level, but without it, it really doesn't affect the performance of the power supply. The only time it would actually affect it is if you're going for like a huge SLI setup, or you're pushing that power supply to the max, or if you're doing a like really major overclocking where the differences in the voltage will really cause instability. We're not doing anything crazy like that, so we're going to be good taking them out. Is that enough disclaimers for you all? Gotta hope so. I'm getting kind of dry trying to make sure I don't miss anything on this, because there's just so much little stuff that you don't know about until you run into it, and then you're like, oh crap, let me look that up online. Let me look that up online. So we've got them open. We're trying to figure out what wire on this end goes to what wire on this end. What we're going to do is we're going to make a chart. We're going to make a chart that says PSU and VGA. And that's going to kind of correspond to our ends. So, actually I'm going to do, yeah, PSU, VGA. And I'm going to label this whole thing VGA, so I don't confuse it with my later CPU cables. So on the power supply, I'm going to have there's 8 pins, so we'll do 1, 2, 3, 4, and we're going to make another little bracket here. PSU 5, 6, 7, 8. Now, all these pins are the pins in this side, the side that plugs into the PSU. So what we want to do is find out the corresponding VGA pin to the PSU pin. We're going to do that by finding number 1 on our PSU connector, which if we look at it, there's a small number 1 up there. And these all are standardized. I mean, you know, 1 is always the top left when you're looking at the back with the clip on the bottom. So, but we're going to find wire number 1. Take our ATX removal tool, and hopefully this is easier than some of the other Corsairs I've been messing with. Yep, we're going to pull that pin. We're going to follow it to the other side, and since I'm only taking 1 out at a time, I can kind of flop this around and do whatever, and that's the big key to this, is 1 at a time. Because if you take 2 out, you're going to get lost at some point in time. This may not get you, but maybe the 24 pin with a couple extra wires will. So number 1 wire, and we're going to follow it to our VGA pin or connector, and it amazingly goes into number 1. So what I'm going to do is write 1 under VGA. So when I go back to put in my sleeved cables, I can know that I can put 1 end of the cable in the power supply 1 slot, and put that same cable into the VGA 1 slot, and that's going to be the same as what came from the factory. Now what I like to do is then go ahead and pull this wire completely. This keeps me from say pulling out number 2, getting over here and getting it confused with this one already. And it also makes it easier because I'm actually trying to get these down. I'm trying to get all the wires out of this connector anyway because I'm reusing it. So pulling them out and tossing the wires to the side kind of gets us on our direction that we're going anyway. So I'm going to see if I can pull this one out. Like I said, that last one came out easier than the other ones I've pulled. And sometimes you'll notice I kind of roll it around a little bit and tug up and down a little. Sometimes you just have to work it to where the pin, the clips on the oh wow, I actually pulled out the wire. Never mind. Sometimes you have to work it around a little bit and find the sweet spot for it to pull out. Sometimes you pull the wire out of the terminal, which is not good, but it's not horrible. There are ways of pulling these out, normally including using needle nose pliers. Oh, and I bent my tool as well. Gosh darn it. We're just all over the place today. One other way of doing it is to use your terminal tool, slide it in, and then take another pin tool and go in between and push out from the front. It's a pain, but it's doable. But, man, that's bothering me. Since I don't like the 6+8s anyway, or 6+2s anyway, I'm not even going to worry about it. That terminal can stay in there because I don't care about it. I'm actually going to probably trash that when I'm done. So we've got number 1. Then we're going to go and find number 2 on our power supply connector. Hopefully not rip the wire out of the terminal on this one. I don't know what it is, but these are just really difficult to get out. There we go. And didn't even rip it out of the terminal. So number 2, we're going to follow that wire back. And it, amazingly enough, wow. You know, I say something about, oh, well, these wires go all over the place. And maybe they don't connect straight up. And then I get the power supply where 1 goes to 1, 2 goes to 2. It's crazy. I think I haven't done older Corsairs. I mainly have done Cooler Master and Silverstone. And I don't hardly remember the Silverstone, but the Cooler Masters that I've done, the wires go all over the place no matter what set you get. But I was doing some research, and I guess a lot of the Corsair stuff actually did 1 to 1, 2 to 2, 3 to 3 kind of stuff until they changed their motherboard connector. So maybe this set will go 1 to 1, 2 to 2. Don't count on it though. You always want to check and make sure because, man, a $600 graphics card or a $400 graphics card or even a $200 graphics card is a real big mistake to, you know, cut corners here and there and save a little bit of time. I'm going to go ahead and snip that wire, get it out of the way. And we're going to write, before I forget, 2 on the PSU goes to 2 on the VGA. Now, normally I would go through and get all these out and fill out my little chart here, but in the interest of time, we're going to skip a little bit of that and hit a few other little things real quick. One of those things is the double wires that you're going to run into. This is our motherboard connector, and number 10 on our motherboard side has 2 wires going into 1 pin. Now that's great for them, but for us it really is kind of an issue because there's no way we can get sleeving on both these wires, fit it into 1 pin, and fit it back into the connector. There's just not enough room. They can barely get 2 wires into that thing. So what we've got to do is we've got to splice this to give ourselves 1 end and 2 ends down here. And I'm going to cover that in a video, I think probably the next video, because I really just don't want to drag on and waste your time on this one. So that was the one part where I said, don't go sleeving quite yet. There are a few that you're going to have to find that are going to be doubled up like that, and you will have to do some splicing here and there. And the sleeving on that's relatively easy, and I'll cover it when I do the video on the actual splicing. So since we've covered the splicing, we've covered the pinouts. It's hard for me to kind of put this into words to explain it. I don't know. Like I say, it's just hard to put it out there and explain it. So if you've got questions, leave me something in the comments. There might be something I glossed over that you all want to know more about, or man, if I've had personal experience with this product or that product, put that in the comments, and that way I can get back and hit the stuff that you all want to know. I guess the last thing I'm going to say is about my tape. I'm really proud of my tape, by the way. I've watched videos where people do it all sorts of different ways. But this stuff has saved my butt so many times for breaking cables or messing up a wire and being able to go back and write something down. On the PS or on the VGAs, sometimes the numbering won't be right on the +2. So you can make yourself a note saying that, okay, 1 through 6 is actually what normally would be 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, or 4, 5, 6, 7 on the 8 pin, and then the +2 would be an extra 2. You can make yourself notes so you kind of remember that stuff, and when you're putting it all back together, you can say, oh yeah, that's how this was. This is what it looks like. This is what corresponds to what. Also, when you're done and you've got this tape laid out all nice and neat with all your chicken scratches on it about what cable goes where and what length of wire, you can go back and take a picture of this. And I do for every build. I go back when I'm finished. I'll take a camera or my phone, and I'll take a picture of this, of everything I wrote down. That way, if you ever need to go back and work on the case or work on the PSU, you've got a record of where everything goes. You don't have to refigure out your pins because you already know where they are. You've got a roadmap already. So I guess that's about it that I can think of for this round. Like I say, our next video we'll get into the splicing of the wires and sleeving those. And then I think you'll actually have a full set of cables. Or be able to do your own full set. So until then, we'll see you later. Hey guys, one more thing. Let me know what mods you want to see done to this. I've got a few in mind, but you know, 2 heads are better than 1, or however many heads we can put together on this thing. So leave me something in the comments. Let me know what mods you want to see, and also be thinking of a name. All I can think of is Snowflake, and that's not really going to fly with me. So be creative. Thanks, guys.